The forest floor trembled beneath Alex Turner's boots as he knelt beside a fallen log, carefully collecting water samples from the stream that wound through the ancient trees of Kepler 438b. The planet's twin suns cast dancing shadows through the canopy above, creating patterns of light that shifted with each gentle breeze. Alex had been studying the unique microorganisms in these waters for 3 months now, fascinated by how life had evolved so differently on this distant world. A sound like thunder split the peaceful afternoon air, but thunder that lasted too long and grew too loud. Alex looked up from his collection kit just in time to see something massive tear through the sky above the tree line. The object was unlike anything he had ever seen, constructed of materials that seemed to bend light around them, creating ripples in the air like heat waves on a summer day. The crash that followed shook the entire forest. Birds erupted from their roosts in panicked clouds, while smaller creatures scurried for cover beneath rocks and fallen logs. Alex felt the impact through his chest, a deep vibration that made his teeth ache. Without hesitation, he abandoned his scientific equipment and ran toward the sound, his medical training overriding the voice in his head that warned him about potential dangers. The crash site was a scene of devastation that stretched across nearly half a mile. Ancient trees lay splintered and smoking. Their massive trunks snapped like twigs by the force of the impact. The vessel itself had carved a deep furrow in the earth before coming to rest against a rocky cliff face. As Alex approached, he could see that the ship was beautiful, even in its destruction, made of some crystalline material that caught and reflected the sunlight in impossible ways. Steam rose from various parts of the wreckage, and strange symbols flickered with dying light. Along what might have been the hull, Alex could hear sounds from within the ship, not mechanical noises, but something that made his heart race with both fear and excitement. They were sounds of pain, of distress, but unmistakably alive and intelligent. Finding an opening in the twisted metal and crystal, Alex squeezed inside the alien vessel. The interior was vast, with corridors that seemed too large for any creature he could imagine. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows on the walls, and the air tasted of ozone and something sweet that reminded him of flowers he had never smelled. Following the sounds of distress deeper into the ship, Alex finally found the source. In what might have been a cargo hold or living quarters, a creature unlike anything in Earth's fossil record lay trapped beneath a fallen beam. She was magnificent and terrifying at the same time, easily 12 feet from nose to tail, with scales that shifted color from deep purple to silver as the light moved across them. Her head was elegant and intelligent, with large eyes that fixed on Alex with an intensity that made him forget to breathe. The creature was clearly female and heavily pregnant. Her breathing was labored, and Alex could see that the beam across. Her body was preventing her from moving. Worse yet, he could tell from her obvious distress that she was going into labor, probably triggered by the trauma of the crash. Alex had delivered babies before during his medical training, but never dragon babies, and certainly never under these circumstances. He worked quickly to free her, using tools from his emergency kit and salvaged equipment from the ship. The creature watched him with those intelligent eyes, and though they shared no common language, he could sense her gratitude and trust. When the beam finally shifted enough for her to move, the creature immediately began the process of giving birth. Alex found himself assisting in ways he had never imagined, helping to deliver not one but 3 small dragons, each no bigger than a house cat but perfectly formed with tiny scales that gleamed like jewels. The mother dragon, exhausted from her ordeal, managed to clean her babies before collapsing into sleep. Alex carefully gathered the newborns, surprised by how warm they were and how they seemed to instinctively trust him. He made a nest for them using fabric from the ship and kept them close to their mother's warm body. As the hours passed, Alex set up a camp near the wreckage. He used his emergency rations to keep himself fed and discovered that the mother dragon could eat some of the local fruits that grew wild in the forest. The babies, when they woke, seemed interested in everything around them, their tiny heads turning to follow sounds and movements with curious intelligence. By the time the planet's suns began to set, Alex realized his life had changed forever. He was no longer just a marine biologist studying alien microorganisms. He had become the unlikely guardian of a dragon family, responsible for creatures that might be the most intelligent beings he had ever encountered. The mother dragon stirred. As darkness fell, lifting her great head to look at Alex with what he could only interpret as gratitude. She made soft sounds that seemed almost musical, and when he responded with gentle words, she appeared to listen carefully, as if trying to understand his language. That night, as Alex lay beside the wreckage under the light of alien stars, the baby dragons curled up against his warmth while their mother kept watch. He knew that everything about his quiet life as a researcher had just become infinitely more complicated, but as he felt the tiny heartbeats of the sleeping dragons against his chest, he also knew he would do whatever it took to protect them. The forest around them was full of night sounds, some familiar from his months on the planet, and others that were new and strange. Alex wondered what other surprises this world might hold, and what challenges lay ahead for his unusual new family. Little did he know that his actions that day had set in motion events that would change the relationship between humans and dragons forever. 3 weeks had passed since the crash, and Alex had grown accustomed to waking up with 3 small dragons draped across his sleeping bag like warm, scaly cats. The babies had grown remarkably fast, now the size of medium dogs, and their personalities were becoming more distinct each day. The smallest female, who Alex had started calling Nova because of her bright silver scales, was bold and adventurous, always the first to investigate new things. Her sister Stellar was more cautious, but incredibly intelligent, often watching Alex work with intense concentration as if trying to understand human tools and methods. The male, Cosmo, was playful and affectionate, constantly seeking attention and approval from both Alex and his mother. Their mother had recovered well from her injuries, though Alex noticed she still favored her left wing when she moved. He had taken to calling her Luna because of the way her scales caught moonlight, creating patterns that reminded him of the phases of Earth's moon. What amazed him most was how quickly she had begun to understand human speech. Not only did she recognize dozens of words, but she had started making sounds that were clearly attempts at mimicking human language. Communication between them had evolved into something remarkable. Luna would draw pictures in the dirt with her, claws, simple but effective illustrations that helped bridge the gap between their species. Alex would respond with his own drawings, and gradually they built a shared vocabulary of symbols and gestures. Sometimes, Alex could swear he felt impressions directly in his mind, images and emotions that seemed to come from Luna herself, though he told himself it was probably just his imagination working overtime. It was during one of these communication sessions that Alex learned the truth about Luna's situation. Through a combination of her drawings and the strange mental impressions, she told him a story that made his blood run cold. She showed him images of dragons and humans meeting in peace, of ships exchanging greetings among the stars. But then came pictures of violence, of fire and destruction, of eggs being broken and dragons falling from the sky. Luna drew herself fleeing, her belly swollen with the babies she now cradled. She showed Alex other dragons pursuing her, their intentions clearly hostile. Through gestures and sounds, she made him understand that she had been branded a traitor by her own kind for refusing to participate in attacks on human colonies. Her disagreement with the war had marked her for death among her own people. The realization hit Alex like a physical blow. The Dragon War that had been raging across several human colonies wasn't just a conflict between species. It was also a civil war among dragons, with Luna representing a faction that believed in peace, while others demanded complete destruction of humanity. Her rescue of the babies wasn't just a personal matter. It was a political act that had put her life in danger. As if summoned by these dark revelations, signs of pursuit began appearing around their forest sanctuary. Alex noticed strange marks on trees that looked like claw scratches, too large and too deliberate to be natural. Luna became increasingly agitated, spending more time looking at the sky and less time resting. The babies sensed their mother's anxiety and became clingy, rarely straying far from Alex's side. Luna's attempts to communicate became more urgent. She drew pictures of dragons in the sky, of fire raining down, of herself and the babies fleeing. But she also drew something that confused Alex at first. A larger dragon, one who appeared to be important to her. The way she drew him, with careful attention to details and what seemed like longing in her movements, made Alex realize this must be the baby's father. Through increasingly frantic drawings and gestures, Luna told Alex about Draven, her mate who believed she had died in the crash. But the story she revealed was more complex and heartbreaking than Alex had imagined. Draven hadn't just lost his mate in the war, he had lost their first clutch of eggs to human weapons during the initial conflict that started the war. His grief had transformed him into something dark and dangerous, a dragon consumed with hatred for all humans. Luna showed Alex images that made his hands shake. Drawings of human settlements burning, of Draven leading attacks with ruthless efficiency, of dragons following him into battle with blind loyalty. The dragon Alex might soon face wasn't just a protective father. He was a war criminal responsible for the deaths of thousands of humans across multiple colonies. But Luna's drawings also revealed her plan, desperate and dangerous as it was. She intended to reveal herself to Draven, to show him that she was alive and that their new children were safe. She believed that seeing her alive might break through his rage, might remind him of who he used to be before grief had consumed him. Alex understood the logic, but he also saw the terrible risk. If Draven had truly become the monster Luna's drawing suggested, her appearance might not calm him but enrage him further. The babies seemed to sense the growing tension. They stayed closer to Alex than ever, their large eyes reflecting an intelligence that understood more than their young age should allow. Cosmo, in particular, had become almost protective of Alex, positioning himself between the human and any potential threat, despite being small enough that Alex could still carry him easily. As the days passed, the signs of approaching danger grew stronger. Luna's agitation increased, and she began making sounds Alex had never heard before, low calls that seemed to carry for miles through the forest. Alex realized she was calling to Draven, letting him know she was alive and where to find her. The night before everything changed, Luna approached Alex with a gentleness that broke his heart. She nuzzled him carefully with her great head, and the mental impressions he received were so clear there was no denying their reality. Gratitude, affection, and something that felt remarkably like love flooded his mind. She was thanking him, not just for saving her and the babies, but for giving her hope that peace between their species might still be possible. Alex spent that last peaceful night with the dragon family clustered around him, watching the alien, stars, and wondering if he would see another sunrise. Tomorrow would bring Draven, and with him, a confrontation that would determine not just their fate, but possibly the future of human-dragon relations across the galaxy. The morning mist still clung to the forest floor when Alex felt the change in the air. It wasn't something he could see or hear at first, more like a pressure against his chest that made breathing difficult. Luna had been restless all night, pacing around their camp with increasing agitation, and now she stood perfectly still, her great head tilted toward the sky as if listening to sounds beyond human hearing. The babies sensed it too. Nova, Stellar, and Cosmo huddled together near. Alex's feet, their usual playfulness replaced by an alertness that reminded him they were predators, despite their youth. Their small heads turned in unison toward the same direction their mother was facing, and Alex felt his heart begin to race with anticipation and dread. Luna turned to Alex then, and the mental connection between them was stronger than it had ever been. Images flooded his mind with crystal clarity. No longer the vague impressions he had learned to recognize, but detailed memories that felt as real as his own experiences. He saw the Dragon homeworld, a place of crystal cities and floating gardens, where dragons and their young lived in harmony. He witnessed the first contact between dragons and humans, a meeting filled with wonder and mutual curiosity. But then came the darker memories, the ones that explained everything about the war and Draven's transformation. Alex saw through Luna's eyes as she and Draven approached the Proxima research station, their first clutch of eggs safely stored in a nursery aboard their ship. They had come in peace, hoping to establish formal relations between their species, bringing gifts of crystalline technology and artistic treasures. The memory of what happened next was so vivid that Alex gasped aloud. Human security forces, seeing massive dragons approaching their facility, had opened fire without warning or attempt at communication. The attack was born of fear rather than malice, but the results were devastating. Several dragons died in the initial barrage, their ships crashing into the station's outer structures. Worse still, the nursery ship containing dozens of dragon eggs, including Luna and Draven's first children, was destroyed in the crossfire. Alex experienced Draven's grief as if it were his own, a pain so intense it felt like being torn apart from the inside. He saw the proud, gentle dragon who had been excited about becoming a father transformed into something hollow and rage-filled. The dragon, who had once collected human art and tried to learn human languages, became consumed with hatred for the species that had killed his children. Luna showed him the arguments that followed, her desperate attempts to convince Draven that the humans had acted from fear, not evil. She revealed her belief that peace was still possible, that the tragedy at Proxima could be the beginning of understanding rather than the start of an endless war. But Draven's pain was too deep, his anger too pure. He saw her pleas for mercy as betrayal of their dead children's memory. The final break between them came when Luna refused to participate in the first retaliatory strikes against human colonies. Draven accused her of being corrupted by human influence, of caring more for the enemy than for her own kind. The last image Luna shared was of Draven flying away at the head of a war fleet, his scales turned black with grief and rage, while she remained behind, pregnant with the children who now played at Alex's feet. As the memories faded, Alex understood the full scope of what they faced. Draven wasn't just a grieving father or even a military commander. He had become the symbol of dragon resistance, the leader who had turned a tragic misunderstanding into a war of extinction. Every human death in the conflict could be traced back to his orders. Every burned colony was a monument to his pain. But Luna's revelations weren't finished. Through their mental link, she showed Alex recent intelligence she had gathered during her flight from dragon space. Draven had become known among humans as the Shadow Flame, a dragon whose black scales seemed to absorb light and whose fire burned cold enough to freeze targets before consuming them. He no longer led ordinary raids, but specialized in attacks on human research facilities and nurseries, targets that mirrored his own loss. The irony was heartbreaking. In trying to make humans feel the same pain he had experienced, Draven was creating more dragons like himself, more beings consumed with hatred and grief. The war was escalating beyond anything either species had originally intended, fed by cycles of revenge that seemed impossible to break. Luna's plan, desperate as it was, represented the only hope for ending the conflict. If she could show Draven that not all was lost, that they had been blessed with new children who could grow up in a world of peace rather than war, perhaps she could reach the dragon he used to be. But Alex could see the flaws in her reasoning, the terrible risks they all faced. Draven had spent years believing Luna was dead, using that grief to fuel his campaigns against humanity. Her sudden reappearance wouldn't necessarily bring joy, it might bring suspicion. And if he saw how attached she and the babies had become to Alex, a human, his rage might burn even hotter than before. The sound of wings in the distance interrupted Alex's worried thoughts. They were still far away, but Luna's reaction left. No doubt about who was approaching. She drew herself up to her full height, her scales shifting to their most brilliant silver, preparing to greet the mate she hadn't seen in over a year. The babies pressed closer to Alex, their instincts telling them that something momentous was about to happen. Alex checked his equipment one last time, making sure his translation device was working and his medical kit was easily accessible. He had no weapons because he knew they would be useless against dragons, and more importantly, because he still hoped this encounter might end in peace rather than violence. As the sound of wings grew louder, Alex realized that everything he had experienced since finding Luna in the wreckage had been leading to this moment. The quiet marine biologist who had simply wanted to study alien microorganisms was about to face one of the most dangerous beings in the galaxy, armed with nothing but his compassion and a desperate hope that love could overcome hatred. The first shadow passed overhead, and Alex looked up to see a dragon unlike any he had imagined, scales so dark they seemed to eat the sunlight, eyes that burned with an inner fire visible even from a distance. Draven had arrived, and with him came the future of two species. The forest fell silent as 12 dragons descended from the sky, their massive forms blotting out the morning sun. Alex had never seen anything so magnificent or terrifying. Each dragon was a warrior, their scales bearing scars from countless battles with human forces, their eyes hard with the cold fury of those who had seen too much death. But none of them compared to the dragon who led them. Draven was enormous, nearly twice Luna's size, with scales that weren't just black, but seemed to absorb light itself, creating a darkness around him that hurt to look at directly. His wings, when spread, cast shadows that covered half the clearing, and when he roared his challenge to the sky, the sound shook leaves from the trees and made Alex's bones vibrate with its power. The moment Draven saw Luna, everything changed. The war cry that had been building in his throat transformed into something else entirely. A sound of pure shock and disbelief that somehow managed to convey more emotion than any human scream. He landed hard, his claws digging furrows in the earth, and for a heartbeat that lasted forever, the two dragons simply stared at each other across the clearing. Luna stepped forward, her own cry answering his, but her voice carried joy and relief, where his held only confusion and growing anger. She approached slowly, cautiously, as if afraid he might disappear like a dream. Behind her, The three babies huddled close to Alex, sensing the tension in the air but not understanding its source. But Draven's gaze had already moved past Luna to fix on Alex with an intensity that made the human's knees weak. Those burning eyes took in everything, the way Luna positioned herself protectively near the human, the way the babies stayed close to Alex's legs, the obvious familiarity between human and dragons. Alex could see the exact moment when understanding dawned in Draven's expression, and that understanding brought with it a rage that made his earlier anger seem like a gentle breeze. The roar that erupted from Draven then was like nothing Alex had ever heard, a sound of pure fury that seemed to come from the depths of the earth itself. The other dragons in his war party took flight, circling overhead like vultures, their own cries adding to the cacophony. Trees bent away from the force of Draven's rage, and small animals fled in terror from a sound that spoke of death and destruction. Draven's accusation, when it came, needed no translation. His body language, the way he pointed at Alex with one massive claw, the snarling sounds he made while looking between Luna and the human, all made his meaning clear. In Draven's mind, Alex hadn't rescued his family. He had corrupted them, stolen them, turned them against their own kind. Luna tried desperately to intervene, placing herself between Alex and her enraged mate. She made sounds that were clearly explanations, gestures that showed Alex's kindness, his care for her and the babies. She demonstrated how he had helped deliver the children, how he had protected them during her recovery, how he had shared his food and warmth when they had nothing. But Draven's pain ran too deep for reason. Alex could see it in the dragon's eyes, the way old grief mixed with fresh betrayal. Draven had spent a year believing his mate was dead, using that loss to fuel his war against humanity. Finding her alive should have been a miracle, but seeing her obvious attachment to a human felt like another betrayal, another way that humans had taken something precious from him. The other dragons in the war party grew restless, their aerial circling becoming tighter and more aggressive. Alex caught fragments of their communication, sounds that clearly demanded permission to end the human who had defiled their commander's family. Their loyalty to Draven was absolute, and they saw Alex as a threat that needed to be eliminated. Through it all, Alex stood his ground. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to hide, to find some way to escape the terrible situation he had stumbled into. But Luna and the babies were depending on him, and he refused to abandon them even in the face of certain death. He kept his hands visible and made no threatening moves, hoping that somehow his obvious care for the dragon family might penetrate Draven's rage. The confrontation reached its peak when Draven, driven beyond reason by the sight of his children, showing affection for a human, prepared to end the source of his torment. He drew himself up to his full, terrible height, his throat beginning to glow with the cold fire that had earned him the name Shadow Flame. Luna's protests became frantic, her mental voice screaming at Alex to run, to save himself while there was still time. But it was little Cosmo who changed everything. The smallest of the babies, the male who had always been the most affectionate, suddenly toddled away from his mother's protective shadow. He moved with the fearless confidence of the very young, directly toward the most dangerous being in the clearing. Before anyone could stop him, Cosmo walked right up to Alex and pressed his small body against the human's leg, looking up at his father with curious, trusting eyes. The gesture was simple, innocent, and absolutely devastating. Here was Draven's own son, his blood, his legacy, choosing the human over his biological father without fear or hesitation. The trust in those young eyes, the way Cosmo chirped contentedly while nuzzling against Alex's leg, spoke louder than any words Luna could have offered. Draven's fire died in his throat. The terrible rage that had sustained him for over a year flickered and began to fade, replaced by something far more painful than anger. For the first time since the tragedy, at Proxima Station, Draven saw clearly, and what he saw broke his heart in ways that no human weapon ever could. His son didn't know him. His children were afraid of him. And the human he had been about to kill was the only father these babies had ever known. The war that had consumed his life, the revenge that had driven him across the galaxy, had cost him not just his first children, but his second ones as well. In trying to honor the dead, he had lost the living. The silence that followed Cosmo's gesture stretched across the clearing like a held breath. Even the circling dragons above seemed to sense that something fundamental had shifted, that the moment they had all been preparing for had transformed into something none of them had expected. Alex looked up at Draven and saw not the terrible war leader known as Shadowflame, but a father realizing that his children were strangers to him. It was perhaps the most heartbreaking sight Alex had ever witnessed, and despite everything Draven had done, despite all the humans who had died, because of his orders, Alex felt his heart break for the dragon's pain. What Draven did next was so unexpected that even his own war party stopped their circling to stare in amazement. The great dragon, who had been moments away from incinerating Alex with his legendary shadow flame, slowly collapsed to the ground. Not in defeat or exhaustion, but in a gesture of complete surrender that spoke louder than any roar could have. His massive head lowered until it touched the earth at Alex's feet, and the sound that emerged from his throat was unlike anything the human had ever heard. It wasn't the roar of a warrior or the cry of a predator, but something infinitely more heartbreaking. The sob of a father who had lost everything, not to enemy weapons, but to his own choices. The sight of their feared commander in such a position shocked the other dragons into silence. These were warriors who had followed Draven through countless battles, who had seen him face human weapons without flinching, who had watched him burn entire colonies without showing emotion. But here he was, brought to his knees not by superior force, but by the innocent trust of his own child. Luna approached cautiously, her mental voice reaching out to both Alex and Draven with a mixture of hope and terror. Through their connection, Alex felt her desperate desire to see her family reunited, but also her fear that Draven's pain might still overwhelm his reason. She began to speak in the dragon language, her voice soft and musical, telling Draven everything that had happened since the crash. As Luna spoke, Alex began to understand fragments of her words, his brain finally making connections between the sounds and the mental images she had shared with him over the weeks. She told Draven about the crash that had nearly killed her, about Alex finding her trapped and injured, about the humans' tireless efforts to free her and help deliver their children. She described Alex's kindness, his sacrifice of his own food, and comfort to ensure their survival, his protection of their family, when he could have simply reported the crash to human authorities. But what moved Draven most was Luna's description of Alex as a father figure to their children. She showed him mental images of Alex teaching the babies to hunt for food, of him reading to them from his scientific journals in a gentle voice that helped them sleep, of the way he celebrated each of their small accomplishments as if they were his own children. Draven raised his great head then, and Alex was startled to see tears flowing from those burning eyes, actual tears that hissed and steamed as they hit the ground. When Draven spoke, his voice was rough with emotion, but Luna translated his words through their mental connection, and Alex felt the full weight of the dragon's gratitude and shame. "He says thank you," Luna's voice whispered in Alex's mind. "Thank you for giving him back the family he thought he had lost forever. Thank you for being the father he could not be." But Draven's next words were even more devastating. Speaking directly to Luna, he acknowledged what Alex had already realized. In becoming a creature of vengeance, he had made himself unfit to be a parent to these innocent children. They didn't recognize him, showed no affection for him, and indeed seemed frightened by his presence. Meanwhile, they treated Alex with the easy familiarity of children with a beloved parent. Through Luna, Alex learned of Draven's decision, and it broke his heart completely. The great dragon was choosing to step aside, to allow Alex to continue, raising the children he had saved. It was a sacrifice that tore at Draven's very soul, but one he made out of love for his children's well-being rather than his own desires. "He asks if you will continue to care for them," Luna translated, her own voice thick with emotion. "He asks if you will teach them about both worlds, human and dragon, so they can choose their own path when they are old enough." Alex looked down at the 3 babies who had become his world over the past month. Nova with her bright curiosity, Stellar with her careful intelligence, and little Cosmo, who still pressed against his leg with complete trust. The idea of giving them up was unthinkable, but he also understood the magnitude of what Draven was offering. "Tell him yes," Alex said, softly. "Tell him I will love them and protect them and teach them to be proud of both sides of their heritage." Draven's response was to make a sound that was part grateful roar and part broken sob. He then did something that stunned everyone present. He approached Alex slowly, with none of his earlier menace, and gently nuzzled the human with his massive head in a gesture of respect and gratitude that left no doubt about his sincerity. The political implications of what happened next would reshape relations between humans and dragons for generations to come. Using his authority as the leader of the Dragon War effort, Draven called off all attacks on human colonies effective immediately. His war party, confused but loyal, accepted his orders without question, though Alex could see the bewilderment in their eyes. Over the following days, as news of the ceasefire spread across both human and dragon territories, Draven worked tirelessly to undo the damage his grief had caused. He contacted human authorities, offering to negotiate a permanent peace treaty. He used his influence with other dragon commanders to convince them that continued warfare served no one's interests. The peace process was slow and difficult, built on a foundation of mutual mistrust and years of accumulated grievances. But it had something that previous attempts at diplomacy had lacked: genuine remorse from the dragon leader who had caused so much of the conflict, and a living symbol of cooperation in the form of Alex's unusual family. Alex returned to human space with Luna and the 3 babies, becoming both an ambassador for peace and an unlikely father to young dragons. The transition wasn't easy. There were humans who saw Luna as a threat, and dragons who viewed Alex as a corrupting influence. But slowly, gradually, the sight of humans and dragons working together began to normalize in the public consciousness. Draven visited occasionally, always bringing gifts and stories from the dragon homeworld, but never staying long. He had dedicated his remaining life to making amends for the war he had helped escalate, working tirelessly to build bridges between the species. Each visit was bittersweet. He could see his children growing strong and happy, but they remained polite strangers who called Alex Papa and reserved their deepest affection for the human who had raised them. Years later, as Alex watched the now adolescent dragons learning to fly in the open skies above New Terra Colony, he reflected on the strange path that had brought them all together. Nova had developed into a brilliant engineer, fascinated by the intersection of human technology and dragon abilities. Stellar had become a diplomat, using her patient intelligence to help negotiate trade agreements between the species. And Cosmo, true to his affectionate nature, had chosen to become a teacher, working with both human and dragon children to build understanding between the generations. In the distance, a familiar dark shape circled the mountains that bordered the colony. Draven watched his children from afar, as he had done for years, alone but at peace with his choice. He had given up the chance to be their father so they could grow up in a world of hope rather than hatred, and seeing them thrive was worth any personal cost. The true tragedy of their story wasn't violence or death, but a father's realization that love sometimes means letting go, and that the greatest victory can feel like the most profound loss. Yet from that tragedy had grown something beautiful, a peace between species that might never have been possible without the sacrifice of one dragon's happiness for his children's future, and one human's willingness to open his heart to a family that fell from the stars.